Well, I knew everybody here except Phil, and we've met. I'm Dean Gamble. For those maybe online who aren't online yet, because they haven't been in yet.
Future onliners.
Future onliners. And I'm glad to be here. So last week we started a new section, Sam did, basically atonement. You know, that big fancy church word that we often have, lots of big fancy church words that maybe even we don't understand. It's funny because my hearing is getting less and less as I get older. I turned on, watching the YouTube yesterday, I turned on the closed captioning, which is automatic. And Sandy read from Romans last week. And, you know, it's very Pauline. Paul rambles and he repeats stuff. And at the end, it said, that's a bunch of, you said verses, I think. The closed captioning said, that's a bunch of burgers. I went back and listened to it 3 times, and then he just said, I think she's saying verses. Okay.
All right.
That's a bunch of burgers.
She was thinking about lunch.
So,
yeah.
so last week, you know, Sam used the illustration of the diamond. I don't have the nice visual for you, but how you turn it and you look at different facets and you look at it from different directions and you see different things. You know, you've heard the same illustration of you put people at 4 different corners of an intersection and you have something happen in that intersection. Everybody sees things a little bit differently because of your perspective of how you're looking at it. And he used that in reference to the idea of atonement, that people have tried to explain it, and typically it's from one point of view or another. I don't know if the German theologian Schleiermacher actually wrote on the atonement, but when I want to sound important, I'll ask somebody, you know, what they think of Schleiermacher's view of the atonement, simply because I think Schleiermacher is a cool name. You know, generally speaking, it's from one of, you know, a number of different perspectives: substitutionary atonement, or what have you. And Sam has broken down basically into 4 facets, and these probably aren't the only facets that we could look at atonement. Last week we looked at representational, that Jesus represented us, kind of substituted for us in that. Today we're going to look at his redemption, atonement as redemption. Core idea: in his death on the cross, Jesus redeems and sets free broken humanity from slavery to sin and death. Memory verse: in him we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of our trespasses, and according to the riches of his grace. Redemption. If we were to use that term in public, would people understand what we were talking about? We talked about Jesus' redemption.
Most of them.
When you think of redemption, what do you think of?
Buyback.
Buyback.
Yeah.
You know what I think of? S&H green stamps. Or was it Topps yellow stamps? We had green stamp store and we had a yellow stamp store in Terre Haute.
Yeah, the little books.
And I remember my mom going to the grocery store, Great Scott, in Terre Haute, and getting stamps and sticking those in, you know, and sometimes you got the big ones that were a whole, you put one big one on that would be the whole page.
Yeah.
And then going in and redeeming those stamps to buy something. Today, probably the only time we hear the word redeem is in context of a coupon. You get a coupon and you can redeem it for whatever. But it's
Reclaiming a promise.
reclaiming a promise. Yeah, they've promised if you give us this coupon can be redeemed for.
If you buy these groceries, you get the reward that you must redeem.
Right.
But it's usually conditional because there's always a little fine print. You must do this and this and this. So it's
Sometimes,
almost always have
oftentimes
conditions.
but not always.
Some.
I give you this, you take that, and it's redeemable for a free ice cream cone.
If in the next 2 weeks, by the way, when I get my 20% off from Kohl's, I have to do it in so many certain days or it's no good.
Yeah.
So there's conditions.
On most of the time, there's conditions.
Right.
Well, there is with this too.
Pardon?
There is with this too.
Yes.
There is.
You have to respond to his invitation.
Mhm.
You have to believe. It has to be more than your mind. It has to be your mind and your heart.
It can't just be a mental assent to something.
I
Well, we-
spent 12 years doing that. Didn't work out so well.
Well, we see what God's covenants, for example, Abraham was not conditional. But to Israel, he tells Moses, so the Mosaic covenant is conditional. If, but like the Abrahamic covenant was not conditional.
I am
He
going
said,
to,
yep, I'm gonna do this and this and this, and you're gonna, and this and this. And you just, it's God.
But wasn't it by Abraham's faith?
Yes, but he had the faith already because he had already done so many certain things, but yes, but it was based on his faith, but you won't see any place in there where it says, Abraham, if you'll do this and this and this, I'll do this.
yeah,
He simply said, go do this. Abraham did it, leave your land, go to this. Now, boom, I'm gonna give you this and this and this, and he didn't do conditions on Abraham. But most of them are. And as you said, ours is in a way.
and in our day and age, almost every redemption of coupons or whatever have conditions.
Yes.
They may be time, they may be, you have to purchase something else. You get a free Coke,
If you
My-
buy
my-
a hamburger,
my Burger King app, it's going, hey, you get free fries and a drink
if you buy a sandwich.
if you buy the
At full value.
Yeah,
But it's still a free, hey, Cokes are $1.89 or 99 or whatever. That's the best deal they make the most money off that, I think.
today we're going to look at redemption. That part of atonement, being at one with God. To redeem something is to purchase it back. In biblical terms, in scriptural terms, there's that buying back. Where if we're redeeming a coupon today, we're not necessarily buying anything back. There's a little bit of a difference here in that it's something that you've had before or something that you've owned that you're buying back. God is purchasing us back. He created us from sin,
Well, from the curse.
from the curse,
Yes.
from the evil one. He is buying us back. We were his to start. He created us.
There's a point in our life that we don't sin because we're not old enough to sin.
Mhm.
We're not old enough to be at the age of accountability. So when you look at every human being at one time, if their breath stopped, they would go to heaven. And then when they become an age of accountability and they have to be responsible for their own life, sin enters into their life. And at that point in time, from that point forward, he has to buy us back.
And that's another of those theological discussions of the age of accountability. We never see that term. We see concept. We understand that children don't have, and that's one of the reasons why we've got some church groups that would, say, well, we need infant baptism. That's to cover that.
The Catholics.
That's multiple class sessions for another time.
Yep.
But the idea of buying back, in our nation's history, especially, but going back to early on, the idea of slaves being bought back. We had many more indentured servants in the United States than we had people who were just owned as property. Indentured servants, those who owed a debt, that agreed to work for so many years, and then they would be free, or they were put in servitude because the family owned a debt, and when the family could pay it off, then they were free. I mean, a lot of the Irish that came under those conditions.
I seen a picture from the late 1800s, early 1900s, and it had on there, it was in Boston or whatever, and it had a sign, restrooms, Irish only. It was only for Irish people to use that restroom. They were considered lowly, and they said Irish only.
My sister-in-law, that's how her family came to the United States, were as indentured servants. And she's done the genealogies. She's the one, and she's done a lot on the Gamble side too. She and one of my younger sisters, but her family, the Smoggies and the Cohoons, but the Cohoons especially on her grandma's side, came as indentured servants from Ireland. And that's the parable of the unmerciful servant, where he owes a debt, and the master forgives that debt because he's going to be sold into slavery on a debt could never ever repay. 10,000 talents. It was absolutely impossible. There's no way that the family could have ever repaid that. He didn't have mercy, and so then on a fellow slave who owed him something that could be repaid fairly easily, but was going to have him and his wife and children thrown into slavery. Well, God, what good did that do? If the whole family's in slavery, how are they going to pay that back? So that idea.
They get jail even, wasn't it? When the
Yeah,
guy,
I mean,
yeah, he
debtor's
was-
jail.
Yeah, he was like to go
I
to
mean,
jail.
it was the same type of idea.
How do you
that
pay for
your family could purchase you back by paying off the debt. And we had debtors prisons,
Mhm.
early on in this
Yeah,
nation's
they got rid of them for a little bit.
history. It's maybe hard for us in 2021. I mean, the idea of inequality and results of slavery in our past, that the whole idea of slavery. But as Sam points out, all of humanity is born into slavery. Because of the sin of Adam, we have, whether you believe in that you're born into sin or that you're born with the propensity to sin,
The sinful nature.
Yeah.
We were born with a sinful nature.
we're born with a sinful nature.
With no choice.
Yeah.
A baby uses that against its mother
Mhm.
by crying.
Right.
Now, there's some necessary cries, but there are some
Mhm.
enslaving cries that we don't use.
Yeah. The minute she picks him up, he's smiling. But while he's laying on the ground, he's crying,
Oh, yeah. You know,
laying in the crib or whatever.
if you've got children, you understand.
They're sneaky.
The cry of need and hurt versus the cry of, I just want your attention. You know, Kaylee loves to watch America's Funniest Home Videos. She's got most episodes memorized. In fact, she even knows what the name of the clip is. You know, one of a baby who's crying, and then mom, you know, comes around the corner and looks, and he stops. And then mom goes back around the corner and he starts crying again. And it goes on because, you know, we get attention. We get what we want. And that idea of, I want what I want. I mean, really, at the root of it, what is sin
Self-preservation.
or selfishness? It's not
Yes.
necessarily
We
self-preservation.
were born with the basic instinct of self-preservation.
Right.
Now, that develops in sin
Mhm.
because you will do anything to save your own hide.
Save your own hide to
You
keep
must
from
learn
being.
discipline about how strongly you pursue it.
But we do. You know, sin is really selfishness, wanting what we want. You know, it's a different story when we're, you know, if you're starving and you are seeking out bread, that is selfish, but it's preservation.
Right.
But we've got other things, you know, and Sam mentioned them at the very end, you know, whether it's lust or gossip or whatever, that are things make us look good. You know, things that we want, you know, we sin against others because of something that's deficient in us because we're not close enough to God. But the idea of selfishness, you know, and as Americans, we love to hold on to our freedoms. We all do. This nation has afforded us lots and lots of freedoms. And sometimes our freedom to say what we want it's a freedom. It's a right as an American,
It can be abused.
but is it right? It is a right, but is it right?
Freedom without responsibility will be lost.
And will be abused greatly. You know, wrestle with that thought. Let's go back to Genesis chapter 3. If somebody can look that up, you know, back in section 5 of the study. And, you know, Sam talks about where we first encountered the kingdom of God idea, that we need a ruler, a reign, and a realm. Kind of like reminds me, you know, first time I thought of it, of the nation of Israel. When did Israel become a nation? When it had a king, when it had land, and when it had laws. And the same idea here is a ruler, a reign, and a realm. And in the Garden of Eden, we had God as king, who is, you know, he gave them dominion. I mean, that's kingdom language. You've got to have, you know, to have a nation, to have a kingdom, you have to have a dominion. And he appointed Adam and Eve to take care of it, and to, you know, he gave them dominion, said, fill it and take care of it.
Yeah, they reigned over it.
But then we have the serpent shows up and tempts Adam and Eve. What does he tempt them with?
Well, freedom, according to the thing here.
Yeah, you know, you can be like God. You know, oh, wow. That would be freeing, but what did it bring instead?
Slavery.
It brought slavery. Eventually, it brought slavery in Egypt to the nation. Exodus.
God created, was generalizing man.
Mhm.
He created man, Adam and Eve, and he wanted it to be a complex situation, not a simple situation. So in that creation, he created Adam and Eve, and he wanted them to appreciate and worship him. But they weren't robots. He didn't create them as robots.
That's right.
He says, he didn't say, he just gave them an image that there was an alternative. And he didn't say no, but he gave it to them. So they could say yes or no.
You can eat
And we
of anything.
And we all have that presented to us every day.
Mhm. You can eat of anything except we have freedom to do anything, but with that freedom comes responsibility and
Responsibility to,
could be to God.
yeah, absolutely, that's it.
But with it, but with other choices, with that responsibility comes consequences. And the consequence of our sin is being enslaved to it. You know, the things that we each struggle with, sin-wise, is that a one-time issue?
I wish.
No one and done, huh?
I mean, how many times is it one and done? You know? Okay, I tried Raspberry Happy Days tobacco one time.
That's why they call things like gateway drugs. That'll leave a shot.
You know, I grew up playing baseball and all the guys, you know, we had guys that did Skoll and Copenhagen. I mean, I'm in high school. And that's the strong stuff. And I thought, okay, well, Happy Days was the mild stuff.
Yeah.
They didn't have the mint. They only had the raspberry one. I can tell you where it was. It was in Lafayette. We were up there for a baseball game, and raspberry was all they had. Well, it was mild stuff. It was in maybe 5 minutes. And it was like, I don't want this.
So Happy
It
Days
was a
did not
good
make,
thing. It was not good, happy days for me.
so Happy Days did not make you the Fonz?
No, it did not make me the Fonz. And that was good because my parents ended up driving up to that game and I didn't know they were gonna be there. I'd already gotten rid of the stuff, so. But you know, lots of people, that's the one time, but then it becomes, it's a habit.
Mm.
And what's a habit but being,
You had to choose, you may not have liked it, but it's the same thing, I dare say, like coffee. You don't like it the first time, but mom and dad drink it every time, and so you do. And the baseball players, the other guys do it every time you see them,
mhm,
and I'm on the team.
yep.
Enough cream and sugar can make coffee sweet taste real good.
You know, what's funny is,
The French.
yeah, I
vanilla-
drink coffee, but it wasn't because my mom and dad did. It wasn't until after I was, I'd already graduated from college. I was traveling for the school as a recruiter, and we were in camp all summer. And there were some cold mornings, and I drank it to wake up. And I drink lots of coffee, and people laugh. I know when I was a youth pastor, we had a guy saw me one time without my coffee mug, and he goes, "Something's missing." But I've never drank coffee to stay awake. In fact, my first cup this morning, almost every morning, is decaf. Because I know I'm gonna be drinking it, because it's available. You know, if it was Diet Coke and was free everywhere, I'd be drinking that. But it becomes a habit. Am I a slave to it? Probably. Even though, you know, because it's there. I mean, could I quit? Yeah, it'd be tough though. And not because you just have this, you know, have consumed it to stay awake, but it's there.
That's a form of slavery, but
yeah,
the sin, death, and the devil, that's real slavery.
oh yeah.
You know, there's no ifs, ands, and buts.
So we could go with whatever the habit is, whatever the hurt habit or hang up, you know. Isn't it amazing how that ends up flowing off the tongue if you've been around CR or a church that has CR? Because it's true, we all do. We've got those things that we struggle with, that we are enslaved to.
But we've got to identify that all these temptations comes through satisfying a physical sense.
Mhm.
It's satisfying the flesh. And I never used to identify with that, you know. It's always a fight. Well, I can control it, I can conquer it, or I can avoid. You name it.
First class, right?
Denial.
First step's nine.
But like it says, and this is one of my star chapter verses, Romans 8:6. And this is what the whole thing boils down to.
Mhm.
You've got to separate the flesh from the spirit. God is all about the spirit. And he's only concerned about the flesh, and it's a mobile to haul our spirit around.
Mhm.
He's not concerned about the well-being of the flesh. Satan is.
Mhm.
He is the god of the flesh. And if you're satisfying the flesh, then you're satisfying.
We wouldn't do it if it wasn't satisfying. I avoid things that cause me pain.
But what, you know, okay, how do I do that in my mind? Okay, if you're going to date this gal, and you're a young guy and you're evaluating, okay, put a sack over your head. Now what do you see?
Darkness.
No,
You don't see her.
you'll see, yeah, what pyro don't you see?
Oh, you don't see the physical.
You don't see the physical.
Right.
That's my point.
Yeah.
And we all, you know, pick for which you can identify with the sack over your head as far as that. Yeah, and the gal or the guy also. I don't mean separate that. You know.
Yeah.
But in every situation, what are you seeking to, what do you pray for? The physical. Pray for somebody's salvation or a way of coping with their spiritual need.
Mhm.
And, you know, when somebody's sick, we pray for the conquering of the heart attack, cancer, etc. But are you concerned about that? When they're sick, they're hurting.
Mhm.
What do you do to help them with that hurt? You know, we have a habit of, oh, we'll take them supper.
Chicken noodle soup.
Okay,
You're meeting the physical.
now here's where it comes. Do you leave the soup at the door? Or do you go in and sit down and talk to them? Now, first of all, just listen. Don't conquer the world. Just listen. And there may be an opportunity that comes along that you may give them a hint towards Jesus.
Mhm.
But concerned about what lives inside this, not this.
Right, I mean, you look at our prayer lists. They're really organ recitals. You know, we're praying for this person's heart and this person's foot and this person, you know, but they are the physical things. We have opportunity to go beyond if we're intentional, listening. And what's the real need?
Our vision or our direction shouldn't be towards the, okay, you go there to help them mow the lawn. Okay, yeah, that is a need while they're walking on the surface.
Mhm.
But when they bring tea out, and you sit down at the picnic table and have a glass of tea, there's where it comes.
Absolutely. As slaves in Egypt, some 430 years of slavery, God raises up Moses, to redeem his people, really, to buy them back, to bring them out of Egypt. And we go through the plagues. You're all familiar with the plagues, and then we get to the 10th plague, and the 12th chapter of Exodus is where we find that. Let's read the first 30 verses. This is not as bad as Paul, so don't fear. Somebody want to read the first, break it up into a couple of sections. Somebody want to read the first 16, and then somebody takes 17 through 30?
Well,
Okay.
16. He said to the woman, did God actually say, you shall not eat of any of the tree in the garden?
Exodus 12.
Exodus.
Exodus
Exodus
12.
12, where we're going with this.
Oh, I thought you were on.
No.
Okay, just give me a second.
You got the technology.
I'll finish the 17 through 30 if you want after that.
Okay, the Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, this month shall be for you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year for you. Tell all the congregation of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, every man shall take a lamb according to their father's houses. A lamb for the household, and if the household too small for a lamb, then he and his nearest neighbor shall take according to the numbers of persons, according to what each can eat. You shall make your account for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male, a year old. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats, and you shall keep it until the 14th day of this month, when the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill their lambs at twilight. Then they shall take some of the blood and put it on the two doorposts of and the lintel of the houses in which they eat it. They shall eat the flesh that night, roasted on the fire with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. They shall eat it. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled in water, but roasted. Its head with its legs and its inner parts, and you shall let none of it remain until morning. Anything that remains until morning you shall burn. In this manner you shall eat it. With the belt fastened, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover, for it will pass through the land of Egypt that night, and will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and on all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are. The blood should be a sign for you in the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy you and I strike the land of Egypt. This day shall be for you a memorial day, and you should keep it as a feast of the Lord throughout your congregations as a statute forever. You shall keep it as a feast. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall remove leaven out of the houses. That's spring house cleaning, by the way. And for anyone eats what is leavened from the first day until the seventh day, that person shall be cut off from eating.
Okay, that was through, you went through 6, you go.
15, okay, 16.
Okay.
On the first day you shall hold a holy assembly, and on the seventh day a holy assembly. No work shall be done on those days, but what everyone needs to eat, that alone may be prepared for you.
All right, I'll start 17 now. So you shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for on the same day I will have brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you shall observe this day throughout your generations as an everlasting ordinance. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evenings. For 7 days no leaven shall be found in your houses, since whoever eats what is leavened, that same person shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he is a stranger or a native of the land. You shall eat nothing leavened. In all your habitations you shall eat unleavened bread. Then Moses called for all the elders of Israel and said to them, pick out and take lambs for yourselves according to your families, and kill the Passover lamb. And you shall take a bunch of hyssop, dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and strike the lintel and the 2 door posts with the blood that is in the basin. And none of you shall go out of the door of his house until morning, for the Lord will pass through to strike the Egyptians. And when he sees the blood on the lintel and on the doorpost, the Lord will pass over the door and not allow the destroyer to come into your houses to strike you. And you shall observe this thing as an ordinance for you and for your sons forever. It will come to pass when you come to the land which the Lord will give you, just as he promised, that you shall keep this service. And it shall be when your children say to you, what do you mean by this service? That you will say, it is the Passover sacrifice of the Lord, who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt when he struck the Egyptians and delivered our households. So the people bowed their heads and worshiped. Then the children of Israel went away and did so just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron, so they did. And it came to pass at midnight that the Lord struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of the Pharaoh who sat on his throne to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the livestock. Verse 30. So Pharaoh rose in the night, he and all his servants and all of the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one dead. That's verse 30.
Be reminded, God takes things seriously. Very specific. I love what Sam says just above where it says Exodus 19, 1 through 8. They were not redeemed from slavery to freedom in the American way of thinking. Rather, they went from belonging to Pharaoh to belonging to God. Freedom, as we think in a political sense, is very different than freedom that God gives. When he buys us back, gives us freedom from sin, freedom from our from ourselves. Why do you think God chose a lamb?
I think the lamb, if you look at animals and such, the lamb is probably the most probably more meek, but they're also, they can't do anything. They can't fight. They can't really, they're kind of dumb. They need a shepherd to lead and they need guidance. They need hands-on, for lack of better words, at all times. And then they also are very good at following, though. If you give them a leader, a shepherd, they hear the voice, and even though they're not the sharpest tool in the shed, they will follow that voice. And if another voice comes in, they won't usually respond to that. They learn, but they're just not. Teresa Gigi always gives us the better description. Someone that raises sheep and raises lamb, and they're just defenseless. Really, they just can't take care of themselves. And there's a perfect example, I think, of human beings, even though we don't realize it. So we turn
that image is constantly referring to us, that imagery. But God, here it is. If you do these things, I will buy you back. I mean, the redemption came through the Passover for Israel. We stopped short of where Pharaoh basically comes and calls Moses and Aaron and says, okay, get out of here. Okay, I've had enough. Interesting, the details that we get in stories like that. How were they to eat? How were they to be when they were eating it?
Prepared to move. They had to have their shoes on, their clothing on, their staff ready. They had to
And
eat on the run.
And to eat it quick.
Mhm.
That's one of those things that I look at scripture and we go, okay, this is millennia old. But that detail.
It's very symbolic, because what does the bringing the leaven in? What does the leaven represent? I believe sin,
It
right?
represents sin.
Right,
Get
so-
the sin out of the house. And we go from that. Sam talks about what happens at Mount Sinai. Now therefore, if you indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession amongst all people. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. This is at Sinai, referring to the Jewish people. How does that shift once we get to the New Testament? Who are the kingdom of priests?
The Christians are, in a sense, we're to teach people, show people, to lead them to God.
The church, a kingdom of priests, a royal priesthood, a holy nation.
I just want to comment about, the process of the instructions they were given for preparing the lamb and so forth.
Mhm.
I don't think this was intended, and it wasn't, and it truly wasn't a pleasant meal. Because it was with bitter herbs and spices.
Mhm.
And of course, they were told exactly how to prepare it. It's got to be roasted, not raw or
Boiled.
Right.
So, of course, I don't know what was a pleasing way of going about it in their custom. But anyway, first of all, back off from that, they had a choice to follow. And that is very significant, because they didn't have to follow the instructions exactly, but there would have been consequences.
Mhm. As we were reading through this yesterday and then again today, and once you put the blood on the doorpost, you don't go out. Were there people that went out? I'm sure there were. And, you know, what was the result? Yeah. Yeah, but they, again, the choice. God's always got our best in mind. It may not be the easiest. It may not be, that may not be the way I like my lamb prepared. But he's got our best, what's best for us.
But also identify that sin, God is perfect, he expects perfection. And anything less is sin. Sin, absolutely, and there's no lesser sin or greater sin. And the penalty of sin is death. So sin must absolutely be paid for in death. And that's spiritual death, not just physical death.
Mhm.
You will absolutely, and there's no appeals, absolute death. And you, oh my goodness, all is lost. But then later in the Old Testament, you know, of course, there was the, you choose the firstborn, unblemished,
Mhm.
and its blood will be, you take it to the altar, it'll be sacrificed. Okay, blood sacrificed for sin. But then they turn it into a marketplace, you know. But Jesus will make that, cut the Mickey Mouse. Jesus will make that blood sacrifice.
Mhm.
Now,
Yeah.
all you have to do is,
Yeah. Here.
One thing I noted from that is the first and second verses of that Passover.
Mhm.
Now the Lord spoke to Moses in the land, and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, "This month shall be your beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year." I then go to the Jewish calendar. Jewish have two calendars. They have the civil year that starts in October and ends in September. That like our January, December,
Mhm.
theirs is October to September. But then they also have the month of their, what they call their religious year. First month, which you just noted there, is April.
Mhm.
Easter, the Passover, and such.
Right.
So they have two calendars, so they're getting ready to start their first
Yeah.
here in a couple of days.
Well, the fact that, I mean, that's a significant
Mhm.
change. Saying, okay, everything now is going to start, you know,
Right.
with the Passover. What about our calendar?
New Year's January 1st. So.
Yeah, but, you know, BC, AD, you know, Jesus, major change. History changed, the calendar changed.
Yeah.
You know, and now it's what, CE,
Yeah.
Common Era, because we can't use AD, which is Latin,
Yeah.
Anno
Something
Domini,
Domini,
in the
yeah.
year of our Lord.
And when I first think the BCs used to be before Christ,
Mhm.
when actually if they started it with the year they started it,
It's
Christ,
not- it's
Christ
not-
was
it's not-
born a couple years
Not-
in BC. So
not completely accurate,
no, it's not.
but there was a, you know, at the history, the major historical point.
Mhm.
Same thing here with the Passover. You know, when you're changing your calendar and saying, okay, this is now the first month.
The Gregorian.
Gregorian.
Yeah, something like that is what
Yeah.
we use now.
But the Passover and the reminder of the Passover, it's, I mean, you know, to do it year in, year out. Why is that necessary? Because we have short memories. Why are we commanded to celebrate the Lord's Supper?
Remind us.
To remind us, you know, to give us opportunity to reflect upon the sacrifice.
For the Jews, the Passover was a reminder.
Yeah.
and why are we to pray continuously?
Because it keeps us in contact with God. reminds us.
You know, as you go about your activities, you're Christ oriented rather than 100% boss oriented.
Yeah.
Well, that reminds me, because I almost spoke up earlier about it when you were talking about that, about the physical and the spiritual. This is from John, and he was talking to the woman at the well. This is how Jesus finishes it off. You worship what you do not know. We worship we know what we worship, for salvation is the Jews. The hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. Of course, we know what the truth is. Jesus claimed to be the truth.
Mhm. I want to make sure we get through this next section. This time is getting short. But Jesus is the Passover lamb, the type and antitype. Are you familiar with those terms?
Mhm.
I figured you probably were. Kind of, antitype. So does that mean it's against the type? No, it's that is before. We have antitypes all through the Old Testament, pointing to the type. Jesus as the Passover lamb. There in John 1:29-31. The next day he saw Jesus coming towards him. This is John the Baptist.
It is.
And said, "Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. This is he of whom I said, after me comes a man who ranks before me, because he was before me. I myself did not know him, but for this purpose I came baptizing with water, that he might be revealed to Israel." Outside of this type and antitype from the Old Testament, from the Passover lamb, would that not be a strange way to address somebody? Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. That's a really strange introduction, isn't it? But to the Jews who knew,
Yeah.
they knew exactly. To those who didn't know Jewish ways, I think that would just be a strange introduction of somebody. But what John's saying is, okay, you know of the Passover lamb, you know of the imagery in the Old Testament. This is the ultimate lamb. But then he goes on to say, why I said someone who comes after me ranks before me, because he was before me. John understands who Jesus is. John's older, 6 months older. But yet, one who comes after me ranks before me because he was before me. I mean, there's a whole theological thing there. John understands.
Yeah, I don't think he's talking about 6 months on that one.
He's
Since
not.
he's before me.
Yeah, he's before me because he is God.
The God man. Uh-huh.
John's got some understanding that the disciples don't have after traveling with Jesus for 3 months. Is that
Well, right there where he's telling his disciples, behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. We don't know exactly, but Scripture seems to indicate several of Jesus's, the apostles, his disciples, were for John, with John first. They left John to go to be with Jesus. A couple of them did for sure.
Paul picks up in Corinthians chapter 5. Your boasting is not good. Do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? Leaven represents what?
Sin.
Sin, going back to the Passover. Cleanse out the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, as as you really are unleavened. For Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. Let us celebrate the festival, not with the old leaven, the leaven of malice and evil, but with unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. Peter, as you call on him as Father who judges impartially according to each one's deeds, conduct yourselves with fear throughout your time of your exile, knowing that you were ransomed, redeemed from the feudal ways inherited from your forefathers, not with perishable things such as silver and gold, but with the precious blood of Christ, like that of a lamb without blemish or spot. He was foreknown before the foundation of the world, but was made manifest in the last times for the sake of you, who through him are believers in God, who raised him from the dead and gave him glory, so that your faith and hope are in God.
The time of your exile would be, of course, your time of your sojourning, as they would call it. You're a soldier, you're a roamer in this world. This is not your world. This is not your home, a full home. It's your temporary home.
Okay, I highlighted that statement there you just read. He was foreknown before the foundation of the world. It wasn't like God created us and, oh yeah, there's Adam and Eve. Oh,
Plan B.
now I gotta come up with Jesus. The whole thing, everything until he comes again is his plan.
Yeah, I've heard it preached on where said the Godhead is when they decided to do this, said, okay, this is what we're going to do. You'll need to do this, you do this, and all, for lack of better words. So it was already planned that the Son would become flesh and would have to fulfill this purpose. It was already planned ahead of time. God, of course, again, knowing what men would do.
You said something earlier that I think kind of plays in you. You said God expects us to be perfect. I don't think God expects, I think he desires it, but he knew what was going to happen.
No, he said, he knows that we won't be.
Right.
But his absolute expectation is perfection.
Right.
Now, okay, these people that I've created aren't. But he has created all trials, tribulations, cancer, heartache, heart attacks, etc. So that we must depend on him.
He allows lots of bad things to
It
happen.
perfects us.
It does.
in a
It
sense.
brings us back
Yes.
to him.
The whole idea of Jesus or God and the Ten Commandments is a discipline. We can, if we sit back and relax, we default to Satan. We don't have to identify and say, oh yeah, I guess I'm gonna fall. We will follow Satan. By non-choice, we will follow Satan. And Jesus says, I'll give you this discipline and here's the reward.
Yeah. It's not an accident that Jesus was crucified during the Passover. You look at eating the Passover meal. I'm assuming everybody here has done a Seder supper at some time. We have friends in Terre Haute who we did Passover with them every year, probably for 5 years. I'd never done it. I'd never done it, but you read through and you go through the dinner and you just see all of the symbolism of the unleavened bread and the bread being taken out, and a lot of that Passover now is actually isn't from way back here. A lot of tradition comes from, 400 or 500 years ago in Europe or Russia or whatever. But the bitter herbs, the tears, that, that flowed because of the slavery in Egypt, and the lamb. The idea of the Passover meal and what's become known as the Lord's Supper comes straight out of, what Jesus did was take something that they were so used to and gives it new meaning by saying, this is the covenant of my blood. It's new. It's taking that type that they knew, or the antitype that they knew, and now, taking it back to,
Isn't the feast, see, there's also with the Ten Commandments, there are identified 7 feasts. And we hardly even acknowledge that, but they are very significant. And isn't the Feast of Unleavened Bread parallel with Passover?
with the Passover.
Okay,
Yeah, they occur within the same week.
yeah. And of course, the ultimate sacrifice, the first fruits, the Feast of the First Fruits was Jesus arising.
Right. Yeah. So the holy, that whole Passover week, there are at least 3 feasts that are, and they were instituted at different times.
Passover, unleavened bread, and first
First fruits.
fruits. And let's see here, I got the Jewish feast right here. Nisan, that's the first month. That's what we call April. Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits are Nisan or 7. And then the month after, which is May, would be Pentecost. So after Nisan, April comes Sivan, Sivan, which is May. And it's for 6 days, and it's 50 days. Actually, it's 50 days after the barley harvest. So,
Yeah.
It's May instead of April.
Okay. Different views of the atonement, at one with God. What does that mean? He's representational, substitutes for us, but he also is redemption for us. Questions, comments before we close?
I by myself am bound for destruction. And he purchased me, he bought me back.
Yeah. One of the action points is figure out your financial debt, what it would take to pay that off. What it would mean, just on financial debt, and relate that to our sin. You start thinking about that and being bought back is an even greater act.
Popular idea, theme of today is do your own thing. If you're a Christian, you absolutely cannot do your own thing. You have been purchased and you were owned by.
So you got to do his thing.
We were, Jewish people were purchased by God out of slavery to Pharaoh, but into slavery, into service of God. And we carry that on because we know the ultimate sacrifice of Jesus.